New Jersey, July 19th, 2026. The final whistle in extra time has barely stopped ringing when Leandro Paredes gets both arms around Gavi and wrestles him to the ground. Seconds later, he has Eric Garcia by the throat. Spain has just won the World Cup, Ferran Torres scoring in the 105th minute 1-0, and Argentina's players aren't shaking hands. They're brawling. Minutes later, during Spain's trophy lift, most of the Argentina squad turns its back on the podium, Lionel Messi included. Spain's players had applauded Argentina through their own losing walk just minutes before. Argentina doesn't return the gesture. Clips of both moments are everywhere within the hour. And here's what should surprise you and doesn't. Almost nobody outside Argentina reacts with sympathy. One commentator calls it straight thuggery. Spain's coach calls it intolerable. FIFA opens a disciplinary case before the team bus leaves the stadium. A team chasing a third straight World Cup loses the biggest game in the sport, and half the planet feels relief instead of pity. This channel exists to do exactly what just happened here. Pull a viral moment apart until the real story shows. Subscribe if you want the next one before everyone else catches up. None of this started in New Jersey. It had been building for a month. Argentina walked into this World Cup defending the title it won in Qatar. And defending champions rarely get the benefit of the doubt twice in a row. Every tight win drew groans instead of applause. Every foul Messi won got frozen, replayed, and picked apart frame by frame. Even though the officiating across Argentina's matches this tournament wasn't actually more generous than anyone else's. After the semifinal, an Argentine fan named Gisela Sanchez started an online petition demanding the final be replayed, claiming the referee, Slovenian official Slavko Vincic, had been bought, pointing to Enzo Fernandez's second yellow card in the 93rd minute as her proof. More than 82,000 people signed it. FIFA never engaged with the claim publicly. But 82,000 people willing to believe their own team's championship had been sabotaged by a conspiracy tells you how loud the noise around this team already was, weeks before a single brawl broke out. That's the strange whiplash of it. In Qatar in 2022, a huge share of that same neutral audience was rooting hard for Messi to finally win the one trophy that had eluded him his whole career. Pundits called it the storybook ending, and plenty of neutral fans cried when he lifted it. 4 years later, the storybook had already been written. A second consecutive final for the same core group of players stopped reading as redemption and started reading as domination. And domination, unlike redemption, doesn't come with built-in sympathy. So here's the actual question worth asking, because it's bigger than one fight or one turned back. Why does a huge share of the football world want Argentina specifically to lose? Not occasionally, but as something close to a standing wish. The easy answer is that they're dirty, or arrogant, or both. That answer isn't wrong exactly. It's just not new, and it's not really about 2026 at all. It goes back to the two men Argentina has built its entire footballing identity around for the last 40 years. And the strange part is, they're almost opposites. Start with the first one, because Diego Maradona never once let anyone forget who he was supposedly fighting for. He grew up in Villa Fiorito, a shanty town outside Buenos Aires with no paved roads and no reliable running water, and he carried that origin like a weapon for the rest of his life. 4 years after Argentina lost the Falklands War to Britain, a war that killed roughly 650 Argentine soldiers, most of them teenage conscripts, Maradona scored 2 goals against England in the 1986 World Cup quarterfinal. One was a handball he called, without ever apologizing for it, the hand of God. The other is still shown as maybe the greatest solo goal in the sport's history. Biographer Jimmy Burns, who wrote one of the most detailed accounts of Maradona's life, has argued that Maradona genuinely experienced that match as settling a national debt, that beating England, for him, was never only about football. That same year, Maradona was already a deity in another country entirely. 3 years earlier, he'd moved to Napoli, a club that had never won Italy's league in 60 years of trying, and by 1987, he'd delivered them their first title, then a second in 1990. Locals nicknamed him San Diego, a play on his name and the word for saint, and murals of his face still cover entire buildings in the city today, alongside candles lit in shrines built around old strands of his hair. No footballer before or since has been worshipped, literally, in 2 different countries at once. Messi has never come close to that kind of religious-adjacent adoration in Barcelona or anywhere else, and it's worth asking whether that's really a compliment to Maradona or a symptom of how much chaos it apparently takes to get worshipped like that. He never really stopped fighting after that, on or off the pitch. 8 years later, at the 1994 World Cup, he tested positive for banned stimulants and was sent home from the tournament in disgrace, sobbing into a television camera on his way out. He got sober for a while in Cuba as Fidel Castro's personal guest and stayed close to Castro for the rest of the Cuban leader's life, later adding a tattoo of his face to a body that already carried one of Che Guevara. In 2005, at a summit in Mar del Plata, Maradona marched beside Hugo Chávez in a protest against George W. Bush, wearing a T-shirt reading "Stop Bush." He called FIFA corrupt in public years before it was fashionable for anyone with his platform to say so. When he died in November 2020, Argentina's government declared 3 full days of national mourning. Loving Maradona meant loving a man who turned every grievance the country carried, colonial, political, economic, into something you could watch him settle personally, in real time, on a football pitch, even while his own life was visibly falling apart around him. Now put Lionel Messi next to that. Messi left Argentina at 13, was raised inside Barcelona's academy, and by every account from people who've spent years around him, including his biographer Guillem Balag, he is quiet almost to the point of disappearing in a room. He has never tested positive for anything. He has never marched against a foreign president, never inked a revolutionary onto his own skin, rarely says a public word about Argentina's economic collapses, its protests, or its politics. In 2022, he signed on as a tourism ambassador for Saudi Arabia, a deal human rights groups criticized almost immediately as reputation laundering for a government accused of serious abuses. Messi didn't respond to the criticism. He almost never does. That reticence isn't really about not caring. His own foundation has funded children's hospitals and schools in Argentina and Catalonia for close to 2 decades. He just does it without a camera crew following him into the ward. Even the number of times FIFA has crowned him the best player alive, 8 Ballon d'Ors and counting, gets treated less like an achievement and more like an inconvenience neutrals have to keep explaining away. Where Maradona turned silence into a weapon by refusing to have any, Messi has turned silence into the entire personality. Argentine journalist Marcela Mora y Araujo, who has written extensively about football and national identity in Argentina, argues that both men, in completely different registers, are read at home as doing the same job, refusing to let the rest of the world define the country on its terms. Maradona did it by starting the fight himself, in public, loudly. Messi does it by simply declining to hand anyone the fight they're looking for. Inside Argentina, both are heroism. Outside it, both get filed under the same word, arrogance, just with different volume settings, which means Argentina has spent 40 years being represented, on the biggest stage in the sport by two completely different men. And somehow the rest of the football world has ended up resenting both versions equally. Maradona was loud, political, self-destructive, and impossible to look away from, and neutrals called that arrogance. Messi is careful, private, almost apologetically brilliant, and neutrals call that entitlement. A golden boy who's had it too easy, whose fouls get whistled kindly because nobody has the heart to whistle at him. It was never really about volume. Whether the country's biggest hero screams or says nothing at all, Argentina keeps winning and keeps insisting its wins mean more than anyone else's. And a rival fan base watching a third serious title run in 4 years stops having room to feel anything but tired of it. There's a name for exactly this feeling, and it isn't new. Psychologist Richard H. Smith, who spent decades studying Schadenfreude, the pleasure people take in a rival's misfortune, has found it gets sharper the more an audience perceives someone as both superior and undeserving of sympathy. Dominant athletes and dynasties are the textbook trigger. It doesn't require the target to have done anything wrong. It only requires them to keep winning long enough that watching them lose starts to feel, to millions of strangers, like justice. Which is exactly the trap Paredes and Messi walked straight into on July 19th. From the outside, grabbing an opponent by the throat and turning your back on a podium reads as one more entry in a long, ugly file. The handball, the stare-downs. Now this. From the inside, by nearly every account since, most of that squad wasn't performing villainy at all. They were a team watching a fourth consecutive World Cup final slip away in extra time, several of them almost certainly watching their last one ever, unable to make themselves clap. Only one Argentina player, José Manuel López, stayed facing the podium the entire time. The other 20-something didn't turn away out of contempt. They turned away because they couldn't watch. Notice, too, who wasn't swinging. Messi never got involved in the Paredes scrum at all. He stood several yards off, hands on his hips, saying nothing, which is either restraint or exactly the same silence he's been offering the world for 20 years, depending on who's telling the story. There's also a harder question sitting underneath all of this, and it's the one nobody in the replay reels wants to ask. Messi is 39. Every outlet covering this final called it almost certainly his last World Cup. Maradona is already gone. He died in 2020, and Argentina still mourns him like a wound that never fully closed. Which means the sport is heading within a few years toward a version of Argentina with neither man standing on the pitch, no hand of God to resent, no quiet genius to begrudge. It's worth asking what the rest of the football world does with all that leftover dislike once there's genuinely no one left to aim it at. If that reframing changes how you rewatch the footage, the like button is sitting right there. Because here's the part that should actually unsettle you. The world got exactly what it had spent a month wishing for. Argentina lost. And by the next morning, the anger hadn't cooled by a single degree. It had simply found a new place to land, on a brawl and a turned back, because the hatred was never really waiting on a scoreline. It was waiting for a reason, and a country that gave the world Maradona, then Messi in that order, was always going to keep one in supply. New Jersey, July 19th, 2026. Spain lifts a trophy. Argentina turns away, and somewhere in that half second of a team that couldn't watch its own defeat, the oldest question in Argentine football answers itself all over again. It was never really about whether they win or lose. It's about how loudly the rest of the world needs them to feel it either way.